And we have to begin, Mr. Vice President. First of all,
thanks for having me on.
Thanks very much for joining us on this truly historic, important day in American history. I want to begin with the New York grand jury, as you well know, as all of our viewers know by now, voting to indict the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. He's now the first president, former president in American history to be criminally charged. It's a really significant development. I want to get your reaction to this unprecedented development.
Well, I think the unprecedented indictment of a former president of the United States on a campaign finance issue is an outrage. And it appears to millions of Americans to be nothing more than a political prosecution that's driven by a prosecutor who literally ran for office on the pledge to indict the former president.
But it wasn't just, Mr. Vice President, and excuse me for interrupting, it wasn't just the prosecutor, the district attorney in New York who did this. This was a grand jury of some 23 people, and you need a majority, 12, to go ahead and criminally indict.
Well, I understand that, and it's been a long time since I was in law school, Wolf, but I remember the old saying, you can indict a ham sandwich, right? The threshold, the burden of proof is very low. Prosecutors make decisions, discretionary decisions about what they bring all the time. Federal prosecutors passed on this. The Manhattan DA initially delayed it, passed on it. But when you have an attorney general in New York and a Manhattan DA that targeted one particular American in their campaigns, I think that offends the notion of the overwhelming majority of the American people who believe in fairness, who believe in equal treatment before the law. And this appears to be just one more example, Wolf, of the kind of two-tiered justice system that the American people have had enough of.
But your Justice Department, the Trump-Pence Justice Department, as you well know, they charged Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, over these very same payments and said he made them, and I'm quoting now, from the Trump Justice Department, in coordination with and at the direction of Donald Trump. Cohen spent more than a year in prison. Do you concede that was a crime?
Well, I concede that lying to Congress is a crime, which was, if memory serves, what Michael Cohen went to jail for the most part. Look,
that wasn't just the only charge.
But here's the issue. I have to tell you, I'm traveling around the country a lot. My wife and I are going through a process of making decisions about our future. And, I was
and
just
we'll get to that.
I know, but I was just in Iowa yesterday. I tell you, I was 3 different cities. And even though this has been in the news over the last 2 weeks, and issues about me and another investigation were in the news, not one person raised this issue to me. And I have to tell you, the media's obsession about these investigations into Donald Trump, I think is being lost on the American people who are struggling under the weight of the failed policies of the Biden administration. But look, I think the American people are going to look at this, see it as one more example of the criminalization of politics in this country, and it's one more example of the kind of drama that captures Washington, D.C. and makes it almost impossible for us to solve the problems that this country is facing.
You're a law and order politician. If Trump is convicted of these crimes that he's being charged with today, should that disqualify him from being the Republican presidential nominee, or should he drop out?
Well,
if he's convicted.
If it's a long way to that decision. I promise to answer that question if that approaches. It's a possibility that a judge would even throw this case out before it would even go to trial. So I don't want to talk about hypotheticals and all of this. What I want to tell you about is the American people are struggling under the failed policies of the Biden administration at home and abroad. And in an open forum in Iowa, where the caucuses take place, where the national conversation has always begun historically about the future leadership of the country, this never came up. I mean, I honestly have to tell you that I think this is an outrage, but I also think at a time when the American people are struggling so much, that this will only further serve to divide our country. And Wolf, you're seen all over the world. The message that this sends to the wider world is a terrible message about the American justice system. And I would that this Manhattan DA would have thought better of it and put the interest of the nation first.
But let's put this into some sort of perspective. Trump, as you well know, he has been warning we could see what he calls death and destruction if he faces charges. Now that he has been indicted, how worried are you about the potential for violence. And you saw the potential for violence, the real violence, and you were there on January 6th.
Right. Well, there's no excuse for that kind of rhetoric on either side of this debate. And there's really no reason to be calling for people to be protesting over it as well. I think, look, I know President Trump well, and I know President Trump can take care of himself in the courtroom, and he ought to focus on that right now. But I got to tell you, this is going to be
outrageous.
very.
You agree, though? His language is outrageous.
Well, look, the harsh language on either side of this is unacceptable, including that. But I want to say to you, I really do believe that this decision today is a great disservice to the country. And the idea that for the first time in American history, a former president would be indicted on a campaign finance issue, to me, it just smacks of political prosecution. And I think the overwhelming majority of the American people will see it that way, Wolf.
Are there any circumstances at all, Mr. Vice President, in which you would think it would be appropriate to criminally prosecute a former U.S. president, or should former presidents be categorically immune from any and all criminal charges?
No one is above the law, including former presidents. Let me be clear on that point. And the American people know this. But in this case, and a controversy over campaign finance, I can't speak to the merits of this case at all, but I can speak to the issue emanating out of a question over campaign finance should never have risen to the level to bring an unprecedented and historic prosecution
So
against
should
a former
Trump have
president.
been treated differently than Michael Cohen, who went to jail for doing this?
Well, Michael Cohen went to jail for lying to Congress. Look, this is an issue about campaign finances, and it's a tenuous at best. And I've even seen here on the airwaves of CNN a whole lot of legal experts that have been saying, not this case. And prosecutors make these decisions all the time for everyday Americans and for people in high positions and people of great influence. So this is a bad decision by a political prosecutor, and I think the American people are going to see right through it.
Does Trump's indictment today change at all your calculus as to whether or not you're going to actually run for president yourself?
No, it has no bearing on our decision. For me, for my wife, Karen, it all comes down to our sense of calling, and we're going to continue to travel around the country, listen intently, and reflect on our years. And I've known you all those years, Wolf. My years in leadership in the Congress, my years as governor of Indiana, and 4 years as Vice President of the United States, creating a record in an administration that, while it did not end well, I'll always be proud of the record of the Trump-Pence administration. We're going to reflect on all of that and decide where we might next contribute to the life of the nation.
We'll get to your decision-making on whether to run in a little while, but let me follow up on these